All right, our next session is a fireside chat with the senior editor of CIO Dive and Cybersecurity Dive and the CIO and senior vice president of U.S. Markets Technology at TransUnion. So the moderator of this session is Naomi Eide. She's a senior editor of CIO Dive and Cybersecurity Dive. In this role, she keeps pace with the ever-changing world of technology, from emerging cyber threats to sussing out the impact of future technology on business. She's originally from Washington State, but she moved to the capital, Washington, D.C., to pursue her master's in journalism from the University of Maryland, College Park, and she's going to be interviewing Swati Shah, who is the senior vice president and CIO of U.S. Markets at TransUnion. In this role, Swati is responsible for U.S. Markets Technology and leading a product engineering organization. She's focused on building products with cloud technology centered around customer experience and business value. She is an advanced engineering executive, passionate about people, technology, and combining their power to solve customer problems. Through inclusive strategic leadership, she creates change by managing complex execution plans and enabling teams to reach their highest potential. Prior to TransUnion, she held roles at U.S. Bank, Google, Capital One, Thomson Reuters, Motorola, and State Farm. She holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics from South Gujarat University, a Master of Science in computer science from South Gujarat University, and an MBA from Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. They'll be talking about leveraging diversity to raise the floor, not just the bar. So welcome to the stage, Naomi and Swati.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who were up here bright and early, I moderated a panel earlier this morning, but today is a kind of different format, and I'm going to be talking with Swati about her role, her leadership, and what diversity means to her business. And to start, tell me about what exactly your role entails. What's the day-to-day?
Well, before I get started, let me tell you in 30 seconds what we mean by TransUnion, right? And I'm sure many of you know TransUnion as credit report and credit scoring organization. Of course, that's absolutely where we got started, but we expanded. We are a global organization, and we operate in about 30 plus countries, just to give the sense of complexity, both in terms of technology, both in terms of business, as well as the culture and local market talent perspective. My role at TransUnion is, as you just heard, I'm CIO of US Markets. What does that mean is my role is to build best-in-class product engineering organization where we build talent that powers what we want to deliver as a business.
How did you find yourself in business technology?
As you heard, my passion is people and technology both, and I get very excited about, especially when we solve people's problem using technology. Mm-hmm. And that's where my journey started many years back, and that's why eventually, I went and got some more knowledge through MBA about how do you operate and build new venture creation in corporate too. I'm very critical personally as a consumer, right, and a customer. That makes me more and more have more expectation about what we deliver as a business, and not just focusing technology for the sake of technology. Of course, I have been fortunate last many years to have mentors who I could reach out to and have a safe space in terms of figuring it out what my strengths are, what my passion is. You need sometimes that unbiased and a very straightforward perspective on your strength, which probably your partners will may not be able to provide. That's like a tricky place to be. And I figured out it's more and more going towards customer experience and what I do. That's what I landed. And one of the reasons made me very excited to join TransUnion was very same reason about diversity of products that we have and the focus on making the trust possible, which is the first and the biggest foundation of everything that we do.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about mentorship. And this morning, the concept of sponsorship was also brought up in finding executive sponsors to help you get into that next role. But what role does mentorship and sponsorship play in creating a more diverse and inclusive workforce?
That's a fantastic question. I would say they both play a big role into it, right? Mentorship starts with trust, and in my experience, sponsorship starts with speed of trust, right? There is a little bit difference there in my perspective. Mentors are where you have a really safe space, and you could learn different skill set, you could get the feedback. Sponsorship is that plus someone who has voice at the table and able to talk about the strength that you bring for an organization and what does that mean, not just for individual career, but how does that strength expand the capability of organization itself. I think sponsorship is very critical in terms of us as an organization, us as a business, to identify those talent and see how we can leverage for our future vision.
Go on.
I could also give you a couple of examples. We do have within our organization mentorship program where we provide and we reach out to leaders and talk about who would like to get mentorship and who would like to be a mentor. And then we let mentees choose who would they like to be mentored from, because as I mentioned, it's more of a trust and a safe space. So giving them an opportunity instead of putting them together we have seen really good feedback from it.
Yeah, and I think also providing almost like a list of options, because so often when we look at mentorship, it's, oh yeah, I actually would like to learn something more about that. Oh yes, I would also like to learn how to salary negotiate and have these conversations that just aren't, it's not automatic. It's not in our nature. It's not in a lot of our natures to ask. And so I think kind of having that list to choose from is tremendously helpful. We were talking about this morning, and for those of you who are there, sorry if this is a little redundant, but one of the things that comes up often when we're talking about diversity is, what do the roles look like, or who are the people in the roles? And the most recent statistics put only 1 in 5 women are in the technology C-suite. But if you actually look across the diversity of an organization, that number is generally even smaller. So people of color and people from other backgrounds aren't represented fairly in the workforce, not nearly close to what is US statistics on the matter. So I'm curious how you work to create a inclusive and diverse workforce at TransUnion. Like, what efforts are you doing to help kind of fill the gaps, but also just give voice to those who don't have it?
I think this is very complex, right? How we drive it, especially diversity along with inclusion. I would say at TransUnion, we believe that diversity in talent is our strength. It helps us to have unique voices. It helps us to define the future vision even more confidently, to have that inclusive culture. Now, we also, on a couple of things, right? We also understand it doesn't stop at hiring, right? It's also about how do you resolve or how do you minimize the barriers for diverse talent to come in and excel, right? And I will give you a few examples around that, what we are doing. But that is fundamental focus of removing the barrier. We want, and I want, the best talent to win, but there are many barriers that comes in the place as in every organization I have worked. It's not very unique to TransUnion from my experience, right? So it's, of course, it's hiring. It's about building a mentorship program, building communities and empowering for self-organization of those communities that comes, and getting the feedback from them. It's a very big piece of how do we create diversity and inclusion. I will take a couple of examples, right? I will take one example of there is one leader in my organization, and I think about that more from, you don't have to opt in for a next role. We always have to have everybody consider for the role, and then that personal growth of the career, let them opt out. So one of my leader and I reached out to this leader who is very talented for the next role. And her response was, sounds very exciting. I want to do it, but I don't think so I'm ready to do it. And I don't know, it was more moving from individual contributor to more people leadership and the mix of that role. I think we responded back saying, let's have you take this role, and let's give you a quarter and see where this goes. If you don't think you want to take your career at this place, this role is open. We can move you back. And if you really like, we could pursue it, right? I think that opened up the door in terms of more diversity and in terms of inclusion, to say, hey, this is a safe space. It doesn't have to be perfect. At TransUnion, what I'm especially very proud of, we take actions. We all have best intention. It's how about we take actions around that makes the difference. I want to be very transparent that we still have a long way to go, and we have a lot of work to do at TransUnion in terms of diversity and inclusion.
And I want to really go into how do you stay energized with that particular conversation, because I think we can all think of examples where DEI initiatives fizzled out, where executives came up and said, we're going to make a concerted effort in this, and then it's hard, and it slows down, and there's obstacles in the way. So how have you at TransUnion, how has your organization taken actionable steps to create a more diverse and inclusive workforce? And how have you kind of maintained momentum along those steps as well?
Yeah, I would say, let the self-organizing group come together. I think that is the best way, because there are passionate people who are going to invest their personal time, who is going to help get honest and authentic feedback, and in terms of what actions that needs to take, right? And one of those is Women of Global Technology. When I joined TransUnion, I had multiple leaders who reached out to me and very passionate about it. And it's a self-organizing group. We haven't stemmed that as employee resource group, right? But it's more about how do you build that self-organizing group together, get the perspective of it, and understand what barriers are there, and then help from a larger enterprise perspective to give feedback. How do we remove those barriers, right? Again, it's not only about gender. It's not about how we look, but it's about what barriers there are for the self-organizing group coming together that we help to solve. Women of Global Technology, when we build, there was tremendous amount of feedback about, we want to learn, we want to connect and network. As we are in 30 plus countries, how do you connect with different leaders and understand the market so you can have opportunities for different market that we operate in instead of operating in the same market. And we don't understand what roles are open, and every time, for our associate, how do we create that better experience for them to understand what opportunities exist. So then we took steps about how do we create opportunities for learning, leading, and networking. And that's where we got started about couple of initiatives that we started. One of those is Tech Labs at TO, which Kita Kangati, who is my colleague here, and she's sponsor of it, and we got started, is about we want to learn, but we want to learn as a team together. We don't want to learn individually, and that was the perspective of the community. So we started creating a pod, and from enterprise priority perspective, I'm sure we all have seen there are a lot of bottlenecks that's there. Certain teams are working through it, but we haven't seen much more progress. In some of those cases, we get the executive sponsor to say, okay, let's put it for this part, and we have seen those challenges kind of accelerating how we solve it. And I think it goes back to diverse way of thinking that's coming together.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about a self-organizing group. And for those of you who've been involved in groups that are a little bit more grassroots within an organization, they can be frustrating at times. But I think to a certain extent, business can be bogged down by, I guess the saying is death by committee, where you try to committee a problem to death, and you don't find yourself actually making effective strides to make change within an organization. And so I'm curious, how do you as a business leader support this group? How do you support the women of global technology while taking a step back and let them lead and let them kind of determine what it is that they want to do with the organization?
Yes, I think that's what it starts with. One of those principles that we have for this community is lead, right? So me being more of a coach to this community and more of a sponsor in terms of what do we need, but mostly coaching them in terms of getting that ask even to a broader leadership that we have at TransUnion. So when we started Women of Global Technology, it's not me who defined the vision. I apologize. It's not me who defined the vision. It's this core team coming together globally and them defining based on the small engagement survey that we conducted within this group to say, what do we want to stand for? What are the barriers and where do we go with it? This group also defines and talk about what actions we want to take. One of those is what Geeta is leading is Tech Labs at TU. We do have mentorship program within this group. But it's also our responsibility to say if we get really great feedback, this group comes back to the whole technology leadership, not just me, and say we should scale this. This should not be only for a certain self-organizing community. For example, this Tech Labs at TU, it's working as a proposal right now to say how do we do it across the organization where we bring people together. So it's more about coaching, it's more about mentoring, but also having their back to make sure that they know it's a safe space about what we work. I think that helps to associate more and more strength about we can, if with the best intentions, when we come and propose actions, there are certain that happens. Of course, not all proposal that community bring would make sense. And then it's also a reality hit about prioritization. And how do you prioritize what we are going to get most impacted? And that has been a really great experience for that group to come back and say, we understand, now we get it, why prioritization changes, how do we prioritize and what's meaningful.
Yeah, and I think all businesses everywhere learned a lot about prioritization 2 years ago. When the pandemic hit, suddenly all the projects you thought were important and priorities certainly were no longer the case. But that shift, that quick adaptation, it's hard. When you're from the bottom looking up, you don't see what may be the long-term goal. You might not see where the organization is trying to go. You just see that individual problem that you want to solve. And this is a really difficult thing when we're talking about DEI initiatives, because people are going to say, I am right now here in my seat, uncomfortable, and these are the changes that I want to make. And as executive leaders, we sometimes have to say, well, not right now. And that's not to undervalue what you're trying to accomplish, but that's just to say, I hear you, you are seen, but there's something else we have to do first. And so I'm curious how you approach that, because we don't want to tell the people who want to enact great change within an organization, no, but sometimes we have to say, slow down, or let's slightly rethink that. So how do you frame that, working with a committee of quite passionate people?
I think it's more about focusing on impact that it creates, right? And if the proposal is more about people's time, and there are people who are passionate about it and happy to run extra miles, absolutely yes. But when it comes from we need X funding in terms of to drive this initiative, then you always have to have conversation about what is ROI. And I think that's part of the coaching. Or, we have X budget, and how do we operate in X budget, but also let's start preparing for 2023, 2024. I think when it comes from a prioritization perspective, I have not seen anybody with disappointing face, but it's more about, hey, let's together figure it out what it means. Now, one of the actions that we have taken in our organization, or at least in US market organization that I lead, is we also make some of these actions as part of the objective. One of those examples I can provide is when we talk about diversity, right? It's about, we all think differently, right in this room. If we all get tasked with bringing 2 people as a referral, it's such an amazing place that our talent acquisition will be in, right? And itself will be a diverse group of when we think about diversity of thinking. So it's more about taking some of those objectives and having that as an actionable plan within your organization. It goes a long way. In my organization, we have tasked everybody as part of 2022 to get 2 referrals for any role in TransUnion that you can provide. And everybody were very excited about it. The another part of it, it also helps you measure how happy your associates are, right? Because if you are happy with the company that you are working, then you would have someone refer. So it kind of gives you a kind of pulse check about how happy people are working through where they are.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, especially in the lens of the quote-unquote Great Resignation. And as a slight preview, at the beginning of July, CIO Dive, we're going to run a series about retention. What does it mean to retain the technology workforce? So you have to subscribe to see that. But as part of that, it's what does compensation look like? What does your team structure look like? What does your team workforce look like? What projects are you assigning people? But there's also this part about upskilling, and I want to talk about upskilling because it's becoming quite the buzzword within business technology. But we should do something positive for our lovely mainframe programmers who are still in business. There's a transferable skill there, and so I'm curious how your organization has approached this, especially in this lens of, hey, I'm going to recommend this person to your role, but they might not have the exact job description or the exact qualifications you look for, but this is the trait I'd like to point out. So how have you approached that as an organization to kind of skill up your organization and help kind of maintain long-term technology skills?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things. At TransUnion, we have made biggest investment in technology ever, how we are working through for cloud transformation. And the biggest piece of it is it's not only tool and technology, it's about the people and people and talent, right? And how do you upskill? And more than upskilling, to me, it's more about how do you create the culture of, kind of learning culture? Because today it's X from technology perspective and tomorrow is something else. And how do you build that learning culture as part of that upskilling? We as a TransUnion, as an organization, and this is second organization that I have worked in my career that is investing tremendously in our people, which is really, really proud. We are working through, we provide the time, we provide the development opportunities, we provide certification reimbursement, but we don't stop there. We also provide additional bonuses on top of everything when people get upskilled, right? Because we understand how much personal commitment this needs, and followed by how do we make sure that they are in the role as we were working through the development plan. Now, how do we upskill? Every community or every individual learns very, very differently, right? So some individuals want to do it on their own as an individual contributor. Some individuals want to come together and they want to work in par as a team together. And that's where we kind of go back to Tech Labs at TU and we provide that feedback and say, how do we create that challenge where teams come together and learn together? And it's, again, going back to how do we provide and make more of a learning culture? What I believe is opportunity starts with empowerment, and this is the biggest piece every organization need to invest in. And it's not one-time investment, it will be ongoing investment on this journey.
Yeah, and I think if an organization is willing to invest the time and money, and certainly that is the language everyone speaks, money, compensation, they know that if there's a direct value for the work, that can certainly help. But I think also when we talk about retention, when we talk about diversity, and we talk about inclusion, it also means that I, as an organization, am willing to invest in you, the individual. And I think that's extremely powerful. I think that's something that when you look around a room and you don't see yourself represented, if your organization is still willing to say, no, I see you, and this is what I think you can accomplish, I think that's tremendous. There's one thing that has come up a lot in the last couple of years, and we know statistically that women left the workforce on a much larger scale than men. It's the primary role as caretakers that comes through again. And there's a difficulty in kind of regaining those people in the workforce and making room for them. And so how can organizations make sure everyone has a voice in technology and they're re-engaging with those that maybe had to take a step back? How do you kind of approach that?
Yes. And I think this challenge recently we have seen as women leaders going out of the workforce, but there is also, we see challenge around minority, and I think every organization is different. You may be seeing challenge in different area. Also, as we operate in 30 plus countries, every country and the local culture, they face a very different challenge that probably surprised you and me being in United States. We have this program, which we started in one of the local market. We call it I Refer Her, right? Where our associates, again, bring referral through this program that they know in the market or they have worked and who has left the workforce. And we have seen tremendous success in this market. And how do we bring that and scale that at a global level? That's the conversation we are having right now. So I think every organization need to figure it out where the problem statement is, what different tactic like this program that we are using, and again, empower your associates that contributes back. And it's more about, it's removing the barrier, right? So I would also give an example. We have few female leader who wanted to take a break because of, family situations, but they were very excited to work with TransUnion and they would wanted to come back. And we talked about multiple roles that they could come back with. And I personally know at least 3 of them who left, took a break, about 6 months, and they came back in a role which was even senior role than what it was before. So personally, as a leadership, all of us talking about voice at the table, about different ways, how to retain, how to bring them back, and provide inclusive opportunity. Again, best talent wins, right? But it's also about removing some of those barriers and say, yes, we can wait for about a quarter, because even if we go out and if outside in the market and if we are going to hire talent, it's going to take that long. So why not to wait a little bit longer and continue to bring that talent in.
Yeah, there's some really interesting statistics about what is the cost for a worker to leave. Is it 1.5 times their salary? Is it 2 times their salary? I mean, it's tremendously expensive for someone to leave the workforce to the organization to then recruit the lost time from that person. And so it's a challenge. I have more questions, I always do, but I want to take a pause here to make sure there's ample room for questions. Please. Just real quick, I have to repeat the question for the recording. Do you have conversations about allyship within TransUnion and kind of how to approach that? Was that right? Yeah.
That is a very critical part of rebuilding diversity and inclusion as part of the culture. I will give you an example, personal example. When I started my career back in Mumbai, there were 300 people on the floor, hardly 2 or 3 women leaders in technology. I was the only one in the team that a project that we were working, right now we call product, back then it was project, and it was more about 35 male leader, I am the only one. I think I give a lot of credit to them for me staying and sticking in technology because they gave me a nickname very quickly as we worked through it is, they used to call me Dot. Back then it was .com boom, and they think I was the glue for the team. So when there is a conversation, and I was the junior most in that team, right? So to your point, allyship is very, very critical in terms of when we talk about diversity and inclusion. In Women of Global Technology, we don't have, it's an open community. And we have, I want to say about 10 to 15% leaders as part of it, who are not female, right? We don't, and they are the one who becomes at times mentors, coaches, and also sponsors based on what they see, strength and the opportunities that they have. So we have organically grown that instead of creating as a program. And of course, there are opportunities there, but we have seen that pretty successful in terms of mentorship, sponsorship, and how do we grow that as allyship without stamping that as allyship.
Yeah, I think there's something to that too with diversity, is that just because you're working on diversity and inclusive initiatives doesn't mean you have to be exclusive to who gets to work on diversity and inclusion. And I think that's a really delicate thing for an organization. You, as whatever your role is in business, whatever makes you a diverse candidate, you have something to bring to the conversation as long as you're willing to listen. And I think that's the delicate balance, as long as you can take a step back and hear people out as they're trying to shape these conversations.
Right, and I think the last thing we want to do, or any leader want to do, is exclude anybody. That should be very known and part of the value, what not to do, right? So, and it's a very delicate balance with the complex problem that anybody solves. I have personally seen tremendous passion about how do we bring that diversity of thinking. And you and I were talking about it, right? Diversity of thinking is not just how we look. When we were talking and introducing each other, I'm like, I'm 5 feet. I am immigrant. I am woman. I am woman of color. And then we were talking about it, and she mentioned she's, I hope you don't
very
mind,
tall.
But she's tall. So it's how do you recognize the diversity, and diversity as a strength is a continuous balance that we need to work.
Well, and I think too, I think about this a lot. It's not just my job because I'm a woman. It's not just your job because you're a woman and a person of color and come from a different country. It is everybody's job. And so you should look around the room and see, how can I engage with that new stakeholder? How can I build up someone else? And I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's everybody's role. And you all sitting in this room, that itself tells that you believe you want to take some actions here. I would say if you don't understand the problem of one or another perspective. All of us need to find someone who is going through that problem and who can be very authentic with you, right? Because when I talk to my colleagues in leadership who doesn't look like me, I be very transparent with them about challenge that I face and the challenge that they don't face. And next time when we are in the conversation, we are sitting next to each other, they would come out of the room and they would say, Swati, you were right. I never thought about it this way. So building that level of trust, and it takes time, but building that level of trust as a leaders, and everything start with the best intention. If we make a change, even in one person life, every year, all of us, taking that ask, it's definitely a big impact. I would also add, you talked about talent and retention, and you were talking about engagement survey in your conversation. There is this PR, one of the biggest PR firm, Eldman. They did recent research, and they were talking about 60% of associate in every around the world, I would say, who you would be looking at as a talent. They want your CEO, your senior leaders to talk about on controversial topics that's there, because based on that, they are going to weigh all of us and say which organization they work for. So it's every one of us, our role to say, hey, yes, we recognize, to your point, this is the problem. We don't know everything how we solve, but here are 2 steps we are taking and continue to learn and solve.
Yeah, we talk about your business people. We talk about compound interest. And we think about what is the compound interest of you investing in one person who is a diverse candidate? What then do they bring to the table? How does that scale over time? And I think we should think about it. It is so hard to get towards solving this problem. And again, what problem are we even trying to solve? We're just trying to give people more of a voice and representation and just make our business a better business. And to do so, we need diverse candidates. And so you think about, like, what could my small moment of change, what could it change down the line? And I think that's a challenge for everybody. But we're almost over time. How do you stay energized with this conversation? Because I'm sure all of you have been to a panel where we've discussed DEI before. How do you keep having that conversation? How do you enact change within your organization and stay motivated and energized to keep trying to solve this problem?
I would say, if you want to retain the best talent, there is no other option. It comes very naturally to me, probably just how I have been grew up, where I come from, how do I look, the experience that I have. But you do have that too, and you know someone who is going through the problem. If you would invest in one person, as I mentioned, once a year, that's going to bring tremendous amount of energy back. What I would close this conversation with is, we all as a leader and technology leader, we are raising the bar. If we don't raise the floor with multiple things, and how do we remove the barriers? How do we empower to create opportunities for every individual in the organization? We are going to continue to see challenge in terms of talent, the business outcomes that we would provide. So I think taking one action 1 year and not overwhelming ourselves, that has worked for me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I have to rescind this stage at the moment, but please, we'll be in the back if you have any questions that you want to ask us individually. And thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you very much.